Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The photograph before us today emanates a peculiar dissonance that draws the eye and troubles the soul. Captured in 1905, it depicts a carnival in full swing, bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight. The scene initially suggests nothing but joy. Fairgoers in their Edwardian finery stroll between tents and attractions, parasols twirling above the ladies' elaborate hats, gentlemen in their suits and boaters gesturing toward game booths. Children clutch cotton candy, their faces alight with wonder. A carousel spins in the background, wooden horses frozen mid-gallop. Flags and banners flutter in what must have been a gentle breeze. The photographer captured a moment of pure Americana, a traveling carnival bringing delight to what appears to be a small Midwestern town. But something isn't right about this image. Most viewers' eyes are naturally drawn to the center of the photograph, to the smiling faces and carnival attractions. It's only upon closer inspection that one notices what lurks in the background, partially obscured behind the largest tent at the edge of the frame. There, barely visible in the shadows, hang three human figures. Their forms are unmistakable once seen, suspended by their necks from a makeshift gallows constructed behind the carnival's main attraction tent. The ropes stretch taut, the bodies limp. Due to the photograph's age and the distance from the camera, their faces are mercifully indistinct, though their formal attire suggests they were not carnival workers but perhaps local townspeople. Most disturbing is that no one in the photograph appears to notice or react to this grotesque tableau. The carnival continues uninterrupted, the revelry undisturbed by the horror lurking just yards away. Children laugh, couples stroll arm in arm. A barker gestures enthusiastically toward his tent. Life and death occupy the same frame, separated only by the thin canvas wall of a carnival tent. The photograph raises haunting questions. Were these public executions somehow normalized in this community? Victims of vigilante justice? Or perhaps something more sinister, ritual sacrifices connected to the carnival itself? Records from 1905 are frustratingly sparse regarding this particular carnival. It appears to have been one of many traveling shows that crisscrossed America during that era, leaving little documentation beyond newspaper advertisements announcing their arrival and departure. What we do know is that 3 men were reported missing in this unnamed town during the carnival's week-long stay. Their disappearances were noted in the local paper's back pages, but no connection to the carnival was ever officially established. The photographer remains anonymous. The photograph discovered decades later in a collection of early 20th century memorabilia. We cannot know if they intentionally captured this macabre scene or only noticed the hanging bodies after developing the image. What secrets did this seemingly innocent carnival harbor? What darkness lurked behind its colorful facade of joy? And who were the poor souls whose final moments were immortalized in the background of a celebration continuing, horrifically, without pause? The photograph found its way to my desk through an unusual channel. A professor of American folklore had discovered it within a sealed compartment of an antique writing desk purchased at an estate sale in Nebraska. The desk had belonged to a county sheriff who served from 1898 until his mysterious disappearance in 1907. Accompanying the photograph was a partial journal, water-damaged and nearly illegible, but containing fragments that shed disturbing light on what we're seeing. The sheriff had apparently been investigating this carnival for months, tracking its path through 3 states. His notes suggest the carnival's arrival coincided with disappearances in every town it visited. Always 3 victims, always men of standing in the community. What makes this case particularly unsettling is the carnival's name, Mephistopheles' Miraculous Marvels. References to demonic pacts and payment due appear throughout the sheriff's increasingly frantic writings. He describes confronting the carnival's proprietor, a tall, gaunt man referred to only as the director, who allegedly laughed when questioned about the missing persons. He said they had volunteered, one journal entry reads, said they had made bargains years before and payment time had come. When I threatened arrest, he showed me something that cannot be described in words. God help me, I walked away. The town newspaper from the week after the carnival's departure includes a small item reporting that the 3 missing men had been found safe, having apparently taken an unannounced fishing trip. But the sheriff's journal contradicts this. claiming the newspaper editor refused to print the truth after a private meeting with the director. I've consulted several photography experts about the image itself. One noted something I had missed. The hanging bodies cast no shadows, despite the late afternoon sun clearly defining shadows elsewhere in the photograph. Another pointed out that the gallows appears to be constructed from materials that would be too slender to support the weight of 3 grown men. Most disturbing is what a facial recognition specialist discovered when applying modern enhancement techniques to the image. The faces of the hanging men, while still blurry, share an unmistakable similarity to 3 prominent figures visible in the carnival crowd: a banker, a judge, and the town's mayor, all smiling and enjoying the festivities while their apparent doubles hang lifeless in the background. This impossible contradiction suggests something beyond conventional explanation. Was this carnival offering more than entertainment? The director's traveling show appears in records across 7 states between 1903 and 1908, after which it vanishes completely from historical record. The last entry in the sheriff's journal, dated 3 days before his disappearance, contains a crude map of the carnival grounds and a desperate plan to infiltrate the main tent after midnight. "I believe the bodies are not what they appear," he wrote, "and neither are the living." The sheriff was never seen again. His deputy reported finding his badge and gun neatly arranged on his desk, alongside a carnival ticket stamped with 3 black X marks. Further research has revealed a troubling pattern. Through correspondence with historical societies across the Midwest, I've gathered evidence of at least 7 other carnivals operating under similar names between 1889 and 1919. Mephistopheles' Menagerie of Wonders, the director's Diabolical Delights, and other variations appear in local newspapers, county fair announcements, and police records. One particularly valuable source emerged last week: a collection of glass plate negatives discovered in the basement of a defunct photography studio in Missouri. The photographer, one Elias Thornton, appears to have documented Mephistopheles' miraculous marvels during 3 separate visits to his town. While most images show typical carnival scenes, one negative had been deliberately cracked and partially obscured with black paint. When carefully restored, this negative revealed the director himself, standing before the main tent. He appears exactly as described in the sheriff's journal, impossibly tall and thin, dressed in formal attire with a distinctive red-lined cape. His face is mostly in shadow, but what's visible appears unnaturally elongated. Most disturbing is his right hand, which seems to terminate not in fingers but in what can only be described as talons. I've consulted with an anthropologist specializing in folklore surrounding traveling shows and carnivals of this era. Dr. Eleanor Marsh pointed me toward accounts of soul collectors in European traditions, entities that traveled between communities offering desires in exchange for deferred payment. These legends often featured beings who could create duplicates of those who had made bargains, allowing them to appear to live normal lives, even as their true selves were claimed. "What's particularly interesting about your photograph," Dr. Marsh noted, "is the 3 victims. The number 3 appears consistently in these accounts. 3 wishes granted, 3 years of prosperity, 3 souls taken as payment." A handwritten letter from the granddaughter of one of the men visible in our photograph adds another dimension to this mystery. She claims her grandfather never spoke of the carnival but suffered from persistent nightmares afterward. More tellingly, the family Bible records his death date as occurring during the week the carnival was in town, despite his having lived for another 17 years afterward. "My mother always said there was something wrong with Father after the carnival," she wrote. "His eyes never looked quite right, and sometimes she'd catch him staring at his reflection as if he didn't recognize himself." The most recent development comes from an unexpected source: a collector of carnival memorabilia who purchased a trunk allegedly belonging to one of the director's assistants. Among the contents was a small leather-bound book containing names, dates, and locations. Each entry included 3 names, followed by the notation, "Payment complete," and a symbol resembling an hourglass. The final page contains an incomplete list with only 2 names crossed out and a third left blank. The date listed corresponds to the sheriff's disappearance, suggesting he may have interrupted whatever ritual was underway, becoming its 3rd victim instead of the intended target. What happened to the director and his carnival after 1908 remains unknown, but I've uncovered references to similar operations appearing in California in the 1920s and later in New England during the Depression years, always bringing joy and wonder, always leaving whispered accounts of something terrible lurking just behind the tents. I've discovered something that has fundamentally altered my understanding of the carnival photograph. 3 days ago, an elderly man contacted me after reading my inquiry in a historical society newsletter. He identified himself as Thomas Wilcox, now 97 years old, whose father had worked briefly as a roustabout for traveling shows in the early 1900s. Dad only worked for Mephistopheles once, Mr. Wilcox told me in a quavering voice over the telephone. Left after 2 weeks. Never spoke about why until he was dying. According to Wilcox, his father claimed the director was not the true power behind the carnival. The tall man was just a face, he said. The real thing was something they kept in a special wagon, something they fed. I arranged to visit Mr. Wilcox at his nursing home, where he provided a small tin box his father had kept locked throughout his life. Inside was a carnival worker's token, a small red stone unlike any I've seen, and a folded paper containing what appeared to be feeding instructions. The paper read, 3 drops from each, no more. When moon is dark. What is borrowed must be returned in kind. Most valuable was a crude diagram of the carnival layout, showing a wagon positioned behind all others, accessible only through a hidden passage beneath the main tent. Notes in the margins warned, never approach from downwind. It smells fear. This information prompted me to re-examine the original photograph using advanced spectral analysis. The results were shocking. The hanging bodies are indeed there, but they appear to be suspended over something else, something the human eye cannot easily perceive, but which the photographic plate captured as a dark, amorphous mass rising from the ground beneath the gallows. I've consulted with Dr. Marsh again, who directed me to obscure references in Bavarian folklore about shadow harvesters, entities that consumed the shadow souls of humans while leaving perfect duplicates behind. These duplicates would live on, seemingly normal, but lacking something essential, something only a trained eye might notice. They cast no shadows at certain angles of light, Dr. Marsh explained, and they cannot bear to see their reflection. The duplicates are perfect in every way, except they're hollow inside. This would explain the sheriff's final journal entry, where he noted that certain carnival attendees move wrong when they think no one watches. It might also explain why photographs of carnival crowds from this era often show a small percentage of subjects turning away from the camera. Most disturbing is what the spectral analysis revealed about the crowd itself. Approximately 1 in 10 of the fairgoers appears slightly translucent when viewed through certain filters, as if they weren't fully present in the physical world. The carnival wasn't just taking 3 victims in each town, it was harvesting dozens, perhaps hundreds over time, replacing them with duplicates that would eventually fade. The 3 hanging bodies were merely the final stage of a much larger operation, and according to records I've now traced, carnivals matching this description continued appearing under different names well into the 1960s, before seemingly vanishing altogether. Or perhaps they simply changed form again, finding new ways to move among us, collecting what they need. I believed this investigation was confined to the distant past until yesterday, when a package arrived containing a Polaroid photograph dated 1973. The image shows a county fair with the same carousel visible in our original photograph, now weathered but unmistakable with its distinctive hand-carved horses. The sender included only a note reading, "They never left, they evolved." This modern connection prompted me to search for carnival-related disappearances in more recent decades. What I found suggests the director's operation didn't end. It adapted. Between 1970 and 1995, 17 communities across the American Midwest reported clusters of missing persons following local fairs or traveling exhibitions. In each case, authorities eventually classified the disappearances as runaways or voluntary departures, despite family members insisting the behavior was completely out of character. More telling is what happened to those who investigated too deeply. 3 journalists who pursued stories about these disappearances abandoned their careers suddenly. One was committed to a psychiatric facility after claiming she saw her own body hanging behind a funhouse. Another published a rambling retraction claiming his earlier inquiries were irresponsible fiction, before retreating to a remote cabin where he reportedly covered every reflective surface with black paint. I've identified a pattern in the modern operations. While the 19th century carnivals targeted small towns with limited communication infrastructure, their contemporary counterparts focus on communities experiencing economic hardship, places where desperation might lead people to make bargains they shouldn't. The feeding mechanism appears to have changed as well. Thomas Wilcox called yesterday, his voice urgent despite his frailty. I remembered something else my father said. The thing in the wagon was growing. Each year, larger. Each year, hungrier. A possible explanation for why the visible victims decreased while the overall disappearances increased. The entity no longer needed the public spectacle of hanging bodies. It had evolved beyond such crude demonstrations. Perhaps it no longer required the director as an intermediary at all. Most concerning is the technology angle. Several recent victims maintained active social media accounts for months after their alleged disappearances, posting photos and updates that family members described as almost right, but somehow wrong. In 2 cases, these accounts continued posting for over a year before abruptly going silent. The duplicates are now digital as well as physical. I've begun noticing small inconsistencies in my own surroundings. Yesterday, my reflection seemed delayed by a fraction of a second. The shadow cast by my desk lamp stretches in the wrong direction. And 3 times now, I've found carnival tickets on my doorstep, each marked with a single black X. 2 more to go. I'm publishing my findings immediately, rather than waiting to complete my investigation. If something happens to me, this record must survive. The pattern suggests they're expanding their operation, harvesting more frequently with less downtime between feedings. Watch for traveling shows that appear suddenly with no advance advertising. Note any neighbors whose behaviors subtly change after attending community events. And whatever you do, if you see a carnival with a red and black striped main tent, do not enter. They're still among us, and they're still hungry. The photograph has become my obsession, consuming every waking moment. Last night, after falling asleep at my desk, I dreamed of the carousel. Those same hand-carved horses somehow appearing in my childhood memories, though I know that's impossible. I awoke to find my research notes rearranged, with 3 words circled in red ink I don't own. Coming full circle. I've received correspondence from a retired carnival worker named Harold Jenkins who claims to have worked for something called Modern Marvels Entertainment in the 1980s. His letter arrived unsealed, water-damaged, as though deliberately aged, yet postmarked just 3 days ago. We never questioned why certain equipment couldn't be photographed, Jenkins wrote, or why the owner insisted we set up the exact same way in every town, using his special surveying tools to position the main attraction. It was the mirrors that finally made me leave. They didn't just reflect. They collected. Jenkins included a crude map matching the carnival layout from our 1905 photograph, but with modern attractions. Most telling is his notation about a maintenance trailer that workers were forbidden to enter, positioned in precisely the same location as the hanging bodies in the original image. I've been cross-referencing census records with carnival routes and found something chilling. Towns visited by these traveling shows consistently show population growth in official records, despite local businesses reporting economic decline. It's as if the populations were being artificially maintained, empty shells replacing the taken. The most compelling evidence came yesterday when I interviewed Marjorie Simmons, age 86, whose grandfather appears in our original photograph. She opened a family album to show me a picture of her father as a young man standing beside her grandfather. Dad always said Grandpa changed after the carnival, she told me. Started sleepwalking. They'd find him digging in the yard at night. And see this? She pointed to the photograph. No shadow. Every picture of him after 1905, not a single shadow. I noticed something on her mantelpiece. A small red stone identical to the one in Thomas Wilcox's tin box. When I asked about it, her expression changed, becoming momentarily vacant before she smiled too widely and changed the subject. As I was leaving, she pressed something into my hand, a faded ticket stub with 2 black X's. My research assistant, who has been digitizing county fair records across the Midwest, hasn't reported in for 3 days. Her last message mentioned finding a pattern in the carnival routes, something about ley lines and astronomical alignments. When I visited her apartment, I found it immaculate, as though no one had ever lived there, except for a carnival poster tacked to her bedroom wall. A poster for an event that begins tomorrow, just 30 miles from here. I'm left with impossible questions. What if these carnivals aren't just feeding on us, but systematically harvesting something essential from our communities? What if the replacements aren't just hollow duplicates, but vessels for something else? Something that needs human form to move among us? The most terrifying possibility. What if this entity has been building something all these years? Something that requires the specific energy of human souls collected at precise geographical points? I've decided to attend tomorrow's carnival, not to continue my investigation, but to end it. I've arranged for these findings to be published regardless of my return. If I'm right, the pattern completes tomorrow night. The carnival appeared overnight as if conjured from the gathering mist. Walking through the entrance gates, I felt a familiar dread. These were indeed the same striped tents, the same layout as our century-old photograph. The carousel's haunting melody reached me first, those ancient wooden horses now restored to gleaming perfection, their glass eyes tracking my movement as I passed. I came prepared, or so I thought. Hidden camera, UV light, ancient protective symbols researched from obscure texts Wilcox had recommended. Yet within minutes of arrival, my equipment malfunctioned. The camera showed only static. The UV light flickered and died. Most disturbing of all, when I checked my phone, the date displayed was not today, but 1905. A crowd gathered around the main tent, their faces alight with anticipation yet somehow vacant. I recognized some of them from local shops and neighborhoods, but others seemed oddly anachronistic. A woman in an Edwardian dress, a man in a boater hat who looked eerily familiar. When I consulted the photograph I'd brought, I confirmed my suspicion. He was there in both times, unchanged across more than a century. "You've been looking for us for quite some time," came a voice behind me. I turned to find a tall, painfully thin man in a red-lined cape. His face seemed to shift in the carnival lights, never quite settling into fixed features. Few are so persistent. Fewer still come willingly. The director extended his hand, those same talon-like fingers described in the sheriff's journal, offering what appeared to be a carnival worker's token identical to the one in Wilcox's tin box. "You seek understanding. I offer knowledge." Against every instinct, I accepted the token. Its surface was warm, almost pulsating against my palm. "3 have worn your face before you," he said. "3 have asked the same questions. Would you like to meet them?" He gestured toward the maintenance trailer Jenkins had marked on his map. As we approached, I noticed how the crowd parted for the director, their eyes downcast, movements synchronizing unnaturally as though they were puppets on shared strings. The trailer door opened without being touched. Inside was not mechanical equipment, but a spiraling staircase descending far deeper than physically possible in such a structure. The walls were lined with photographs, thousands upon thousands, dating from daguerreotypes to digital prints. Every image showed carnival scenes across different eras, and in every one, hanging bodies were visible in the background. "We don't feed on flesh," the director explained as we descended. "We harvest potential. Every life contains infinite possible versions, choices unmade, paths not taken. Those duplicates you've been tracking. Mere echoes, empty shells where we've extracted the might-have-beens." At the bottom of the staircase stood a door made of what appeared to be mirrored glass. My reflection showed not one but 3 versions of myself, each slightly different, each bearing expressions of horror I had yet to experience. "The final threshold," the director whispered. "Beyond this, you'll find what the sheriff found, what the journalist found, what all seekers eventually discover." His hand rested on my shoulder, surprisingly heavy, impossibly cold. "Tell me," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "does anyone ever return?" The director's smile widened beyond human proportion, revealing teeth too numerous, too sharp. "Oh, everyone returns," he said, "just never as themselves. I fled before reaching that mirrored door, my survival instinct finally overwhelming my investigative compulsion. The director's laughter followed me through the carnival grounds, seemingly emanating from every tent pole and string light. 3 days have passed. I haven't slept. The token burns in my pocket, refusing to be discarded. Each time I throw it away, it reappears among my possessions. My reflection continues to show the 3 alternative versions of myself, even in ordinary mirrors, each face now speaking words I cannot hear through the glass. This morning, I discovered something that changes everything. While reviewing historical society archives searching for similar carnival appearances, I found a photograph from 1879 predating our original image. It shows not a carnival, but a revival meeting, a large tent erected in a field. Behind it stands a crude gallows with 3 hanging figures. Standing nearby, unmistakable despite the decades, the director. But what truly chills my blood is a detail I'd missed in our original photograph. Enhancement of the background reveals a small figure watching the hanging bodies, a child of perhaps 10 years, partially hidden behind a tent post. The child's face, now clearly visible through digital restoration, is my own. Not a resemblance, not an ancestor. My face, precisely as it appeared in my childhood. How can I exist in a photograph taken 80 years before my birth? The implications are staggering. The director hasn't been harvesting souls randomly. He's been collecting specific ones across time, creating an impossible loop of cause and effect. I've found 19 more photographs spanning 17 decades, each containing carnival scenes with the same pattern. And in each one, somewhere in the background, is a version of me at different ages, watching, observing, present in times where my existence should be impossible. The carnival isn't just feeding on people. It exists outside linear time, harvesting the same souls repeatedly across different eras. We aren't just prey, we're crops being cultivated through generations. Thomas Wilcox called again last night, his voice stronger than before. "You found yourself in the pictures, didn't you?" he asked without preamble. "We all do eventually. I'm there too. Different name, different face, but always the same soul. That's what it collects. Not just what we are, but what we've always been." The token grew warmer as he spoke. Through my window, I could see the carnival lights on the horizon, impossible since they had packed up and departed days ago. "Why me?" I whispered into the phone. "Because you've always been part of it," Wilcox replied. "We investigate, we discover, we flee, we forget. Then we're reborn to do it again. Some cycles we escape temporarily, some we don't. But the carnival always completes its collection. As dawn broke, I made my decision. I won't run anymore. The pattern must be broken. Tomorrow, I return to face what lies beyond that mirrored door. Not as another victim, but as someone finally understanding their place in this eternal performance. The director thinks he's the ringmaster, but what if he's just another attraction in someone else's show? I returned to the carnival grounds after nightfall, the token now burning against my skin like a hot coal. The fairground appeared deserted, rides motionless, tents sagging, an unnatural silence smothering even the sound of crickets. Yet lights glowed within the main tent, casting elongated shadows that seemed to move independently of any visible source. As I approached, music began, not the cheerful calliope of daytime entertainment, but a dissonant, atonal melody that seemed to vibrate from the earth itself. The entrance flaps parted without being touched. "I've been waiting," came the director's voice from everywhere and nowhere. "Few return voluntarily. Fewer still bring the token willingly." The interior was impossibly vast, far larger than the tent could physically contain. Rather than circus rings or seating, I found myself in a circular gallery. The walls were lined with hundreds of glass display cases, each containing a pocket watch, ticking in perfect synchronization. My collection. The director materialized beside me, his form seeming to condense from the shadows themselves. Each watch belonged to someone who investigated us, someone like you, someone who was you. I approached the nearest case. The watch inside was modern, digital, my own, which I distinctly remembered leaving on my nightstand. The next held a mechanical timepiece from perhaps the 1950s, another from the 19th century, all still ticking. Time is merely another attraction in our carnival. The director continued, gliding between the displays. Your soul has been investigating us across centuries, taking different forms, different names, always asking the same questions, always coming close to understanding. At the center of the gallery stood that mirrored door I'd fled from days earlier. Now it reflected not 3 versions of myself, but dozens, stretching backward and forward through time. Men and women of different eras, different appearances, yet all unmistakably carrying something of my essence. The sheriff was you, the journalist was you, the photographer who captured the original image, also you. The director's voice softened to something almost like compassion. Always documenting, never comprehending. Why show me this? I asked, my voice steady despite the impossible reality confronting me. Because this time is different, he replied. This iteration of you has connected more pieces than ever before, and we've grown tired of the repetition. He gestured toward the mirrored door, which swung open silently. Beyond it was not another room, but a swirling vortex of images. Every carnival, every investigation, every moment of horror and discovery across centuries. The true purpose of our carnival was never mere feeding, the director said. It was preparation. Creation of a soul capable of perceiving beyond linear time. A consciousness that could serve as vessel. From the vortex emerged 3 figures, the hanging bodies from the original photograph, now animated, moving with unnatural grace. Their faces were no longer blurred, but crystalline in their clarity. Each wore my face, yet older, eyes containing impossible knowledge. Your previous iterations, the director explained. Not victims, graduates. They await your decision. I understood then. This was no investigation. It was an initiation, and I was being offered membership in something far more ancient and terrible than a traveling carnival. I stood at the threshold of understanding, facing my past iterations and the director's invitation. The carnival's true nature transcended my darkest theories. Not a predator, but a crucible, forging a consciousness capable of spanning time itself. What exactly am I being initiated into? I asked, voice echoing strangely in the impossible space. The director gestured toward the glass cases containing watches. Your limited perception sees a carnival. What we truly are is a fold in existence, a place where realities intersect. One of my former selves stepped forward from the vortex. His clothing suggested the 1920s, but his eyes held centuries. We are the custodians, he explained. Before the carnival, we were the revival. Before that, the medicine show. Before that, wandering mystics. The forms change, but the purpose remains. Custodians of what? I demanded. The director's form shifted, becoming less human, more a suggestion of shapes and angles that hurt my eyes. Of the barriers, he said simply. Reality is thin in certain places, at certain times. Our performances, our rituals, maintain the integrity of your world. My 19th century self nodded gravely. The hanging bodies are not victims, but guardians. 3 anchors at each location, reinforcing the weakened points. I felt nauseated as comprehension dawned. The 3 people who disappear in each town. Volunteer, corrected my third self, a woman whose clothing suggested the 1960s. We approach those who already sense something wrong with reality, those with the potential to perceive beyond normal limitations. We offer a choice. The director moved to the center of the vortex. What appears as feeding is transformation. What seems like death is transcendence. The duplicates left behind allow families closure while the chosen join our work. I recalled the sheriff's final journal entry. I believe the bodies are not what they appear, and neither are the living. He hadn't been exposing a horror. He'd been documenting his own transformation. Why me? Why repeatedly throughout time? Some souls are naturally attuned to the gaps between worlds, the director explained. Yours has always been drawn to our work, lifetime after lifetime. But memory cannot typically survive rebirth. So we created this elaborate mechanism. The investigation, the discovery, the photographs that connect your iterations across time. The woman from the 60s approached me, her movements liquid and impossible. We need fresh perspectives, new consciousness. The barriers weaken in different ways across eras. And if I refuse? I asked. The director's laugh echoed through multiple dimensions. Then you return to your life with memories that will fade, photographs that will disappear, and the nagging sensation something fundamental eludes you, until your next life continues the search. My gaze fell upon the original photograph that had started this investigation. Now I could see what was truly happening. The three victims weren't hanging in death but suspended between worlds, their postures not of suffering but of transcendence. The barriers are weakening faster now, my 19th century self warned. Technology, mass communication, collective consciousness, all strain the membrane between realities. I understood finally why the carnival had evolved, why the harvesting had become more frequent. Whatever lay beyond those barriers was pushing harder against our world. What happens if the barriers fail completely? I asked. The director's form flickered like a faulty transmission. That, he said gravely, is what we've been preventing since the first human looked into the darkness and the darkness looked back. The carnival's true nature settled heavily upon me. A cosmic maintenance crew, repairing reality's fraying edges through rituals disguised as entertainment. The weight of this revelation was simultaneously terrifying and oddly comforting. There had always been guardians at the threshold, keeping something unimaginable at bay. "You've shown me what you are," I said, finding unexpected steadiness in my voice. "But you haven't shown me what you're keeping out." The director's form rippled, suggesting something between reluctance and approval. Few ask to see beyond. The human mind struggles to comprehend it. Nevertheless, he guided me to a small tent I hadn't noticed before, unmarked and unadorned. Inside was nothing but a simple wooden chair facing a blank canvas screen. "Sit," he instructed. "This is not a glimpse of what lies beyond the barriers, merely a shadow of its shadow, filtered through perceptions your mind can process." As I sat, the canvas illuminated from within. What I witnessed defies conventional language. It wasn't merely creatures or entities, but a fundamental wrongness, a reality operating on principles that contradicted our most basic assumptions about existence. Mathematics that ate itself, colors that screamed, geometries that could think, time flowing in recursive spirals. After what felt like both seconds and centuries, the images mercifully ceased. I found myself trembling, a cold sweat soaking my clothes. "That," said the director quietly, "is what pushes against the thinning membrane. It has been trying to enter since consciousness first flickered in primitive minds. It will never stop trying." My 19th century self placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Now you understand why we employ such elaborate methods, why we must continuously adapt. The carnival is merely our current form." "And our future forms?" I asked. The woman from the 60s smiled enigmatically. "That depends partly on you. Fresh perspectives are essential. The barriers weaken in new ways with each era. Digital realms, virtual spaces, mass shared consciousness through technology. These create new vulnerabilities." I considered the implications, my mind racing through possibilities. The three hanging bodies, the three anchors, they're symbolic, aren't they? Representing something fundamental about how reality maintains itself. The director nodded approvingly. Past, present, future. Birth, life, death. Creation, maintenance, destruction. The triad appears throughout human understanding because it's fundamental to the structure of your reality. I stood up, approaching the mirrored door once more, studying the reflections of myself across time. Each had made this same choice, facing the same decision point. "If I join you," I asked finally, "what happens to my current life? My research? These discoveries?" "They become part of the pattern," my 19th century self explained. "Your investigations will inspire the next iteration. The photographs will find their way to new eyes. The cycle continues, strengthening the barriers through awareness even as it prepares new guardians." I took a deep breath, my hand reaching for the token that still burned in my pocket. The decision before me wasn't just personal. It was existential in the most literal sense. As I faced my decision, I realized the director had revealed much, but concealed more. The Carnival existed between realities, yes, but something felt incomplete about the explanation. Why had the photographs always survived? Why did certain images capture what should have remained hidden? Before I decide, I said, tell me about the cameras. The director's form stuttered like a faulty projection. My 19th century self exchanged glances with the others, a moment of unease that confirmed my suspicion. What about them? The director asked, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of caution. Every iteration of myself documented your work. Every camera somehow captured what shouldn't be visible. That's not coincidence. The woman from the 60s stepped forward. Cameras weren't just witnessing our work, she admitted. They were part of it. The truth began crystallizing in my mind. The photographs themselves are anchors, aren't they? Physical objects spanning time, creating fixed points in the collective consciousness. The director's form solidified, becoming more human as he nodded slowly. The barriers require both conscious guardians and unconscious recognition. Humans glimpsing these images experience momentary awareness of what lies beyond normal perception. You've been using me, using all versions of me, to create documentation that strengthens the barriers even as they reveal them, I realized. The photos aren't evidence of your work, they're part of the work itself. My 19th century self removed an antique camera from within his coat. We don't just maintain the barriers through ritual. We reinforce them through documentation that exists across time, creating cognitive anchors in the collective human understanding. I thought of all those who had viewed my research, felt that chill of recognition when seeing the hanging bodies. Each observer had unknowingly participated in maintaining reality's integrity. The Carnival isn't just the physical event, I said, understanding blooming. It's also the stories told afterward, the photographs examined decades later, the investigations conducted across centuries. The director moved closer, his form now almost entirely human. This is why we needed you specifically. Some souls have an innate ability to create images that resonate across time, photographs that don't just record but reinforce. Then my publications, my research, have been strengthening the barriers even as you thought you were exposing something sinister, completed my 60s counterpart. Your work has reached thousands, each viewer momentarily connected to the greater purpose without conscious awareness. I looked again at the watches in their glass cases, not trophies but instruments, each marking a different temporal anchor point. The elaborate mechanism suddenly made sense. Not just preparation for new guardians, but a system maintaining reality through attention and documentation. The choice before you now, the director said softly, is whether to continue this work knowingly or return to doing it unknowingly. I reached for my camera, still hanging around my neck despite everything I'd experienced. It felt different now, heavier with purpose, alive with potential. If I join you consciously, I asked, what would I photograph next? The director smiled. What has always needed witnessing? The places where the world wears thin. I raised my camera, feeling its weight differently now, not just as a tool for documentation, but as an instrument that maintained the very fabric of reality. The director nodded approvingly as I took my first conscious photograph of the space between worlds. The images you capture now will be different, he explained. Before you photographed unknowingly, capturing echoes and reflections. Now you'll see and record the currents themselves. When I examined the digital display, I understood. The photograph showed not just the Carnival's physical manifestation, but rippling waves of energy connecting certain points. The main tent, the carousel, the three anchors. Patterns invisible to the naked eye, but fundamental to the barrier's integrity. Each Carnival location corresponds to a weakened point, my 19th century self explained, examining my camera with professional curiosity. We've mapped them across centuries, places where the membrane thins cyclically. The director unrolled an ancient parchment across a nearby table. It showed North America covered in intricate geometric patterns, lines connecting seemingly random points across the continent. Some lines glowed brightly, others had faded to near invisibility. The original network, he said, established by indigenous guardians long before European arrival. They used different methods, totems, storytelling, sacred sites, but served the same purpose. I recognized many locations, towns where carnival disappearances had occurred throughout history. But I also noticed something troubling: entire regions where the lines had disappeared completely. "The barriers are failing faster than you've admitted," I observed. The woman from the 60s sighed. "Yes, modern life has disrupted the ancient patterns. Technology creates new thinning points, even as it erases awareness of the old ones. Digital spaces," my 19th century self added with obvious discomfort. "They exist beyond traditional geographic anchors. We struggle to maintain barriers in realms with no physical reality." I thought of virtual worlds, social media platforms, shared digital experiences connecting millions simultaneously. "You need new methods," I realized. "The carnival cannot address these vulnerabilities." The director's expression grew grave. "Precisely why we sought you now, in this era. Your understanding of both documentation and digital spaces makes you uniquely qualified to help design what comes next." I studied the map again, noticing how the fading lines corresponded with areas of high technological connectivity. The implications were staggering. As humanity created new realms of existence, we unknowingly opened doorways to something waiting beyond conventional reality. "What form would the new barriers take?" I asked. "That," said the director, "is what we're asking you to help determine." The carnival evolved from revival meetings, which evolved from medicine shows, which evolved from traveling mystics. Each adaptation suited its era while maintaining the essential function. I thought about viral images, shared experiences, digital phenomena that captured collective attention. Perhaps the barriers needed to exist where human consciousness increasingly resided: online, connected, simultaneous. "I'll need to understand more about how the barriers function at their most fundamental level," I said, already mentally sketching possibilities, "and about what they're holding back." The director exchanged glances with my other selves. "Few guardians have ever requested such complete knowledge." "Few guardians were recruited in the age of information," I countered. "If I'm to help design what comes next, I need to understand what came before." The director led me to an ancient trunk that materialized in the center of the impossible gallery. Its wood was darkened with age, metal fittings tarnished to near black, inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. "The archives," he explained, producing an ornate key from within his sleeve. "Records kept by every iteration of guardians since humans first recognized the need for barriers." As the key turned in the lock, I expected to see documents, photographs, artifacts. Instead, the trunk opened to reveal what appeared to be a pool of liquid darkness, its surface occasionally rippling with what might have been images or perhaps memories. "Physical documentation has limitations," my 19th century self explained. "This contains the direct experiences of all who came before." The director gestured toward the dark pool. "To truly understand, you must immerse yourself. But know this: no guardian returns unchanged from communion with the collective memory." My 60s counterpart placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "I nearly lost myself when I first entered. The weight of all that knowledge. It's overwhelming." I approached the edge cautiously, seeing my reflection distorted in the impossible liquid. "Will I retain my identity?" "That," said the director, "depends entirely on your strength of self. Some merge too deeply and become fragmented across time. Others emerge with greater cohesion than before." Taking a deep breath, I lowered my hand into the darkness. It felt neither wet nor cold, but somehow conscious, responding to my touch with curious tendrils that wrapped around my fingers like gentle questions. "Complete immersion is required," the director instructed. "One cannot partially know fundamental truth." I closed my eyes and plunged forward. The experience defies conventional description. I was simultaneously everywhere and everywhen guardians had existed. I witnessed the first recognition of the barriers, prehistoric humans painting cave walls not as art, but as reinforcement against something pressing against reality's edge. I experienced the terror of ancient priests realizing certain rituals weren't just symbolic but necessary maintenance. Most profound were the glimpses of what had occasionally broken through when barriers failed. Entire civilizations erased not just physically, but causally, removed from the timeline so completely that only the Guardians remembered they had ever existed. Entities that entered briefly, bringing madness before being contained, their influence lingering in distorted myths and legends across cultures. I understood now why the Guardians used such indirect methods. Direct knowledge of what existed beyond was too dangerous for widespread consciousness. The Carnival's elaborate disguise, like all previous forms, protected humanity from awareness that would itself weaken the barriers through collective terror. When I finally emerged, gasping and trembling, my perception had fundamentally altered. I could see the thinning points directly now, places where reality vibrated at incorrect frequencies. The Carnival itself appeared as an elaborate machine, each component precisely calibrated to reinforce specific frequencies of existence. "Now you understand," the director said quietly. "This is the knowledge each Guardian carries." I nodded, unable to speak immediately as my mind struggled to integrate the vast archive of experiences. When words finally came, they surprised even me. "The barriers aren't just failing," I whispered. "They're being deliberately weakened from the other side." The director's expression confirmed my worst fear. "Yes, and they've never pushed this hard before." The recognition that something was actively working to breach our reality changed everything. I stood before the director and my temporal iterations, the full weight of the archive's knowledge settling into my consciousness like sediment after a storm. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "The suspicion has existed for centuries," the director replied. "But confirmation came only in the last decade. The patterns of weakening have become too coordinated, too deliberate to be random entropy." I closed my eyes, sorting through the vast repository of memories I'd absorbed. There, beneath layers of collected experiences, I found what I was looking for, the first documented instance of coordination. 1945, I said, opening my eyes. The Trinity test. It wasn't just the atomic blast that drew their attention. It was the simultaneous observation by thousands of minds witnessing fundamental reality being torn apart. My 19th century self nodded grimly. That was when the Carnival began changing its methods. The 3 anchors were no longer sufficient. I turned to study the map again, now seeing it with new clarity. The fading lines weren't just showing weakened barriers, they revealed something more sinister. "They're creating a pattern," I breathed, tracing connections between the most deteriorated points. A sigil of sorts, carved across our world through strategic weakening. The woman from the 60s approached, her expression grave. "You see it too, then. We've been strengthening individual points while missing the larger design." The director's form flickered momentarily, revealing something less human beneath his carefully maintained appearance. "This is why we needed someone with your perspective, someone who understands patterns across both physical and digital domains." I retrieved my camera, reviewing the photographs I'd taken since entering this impossible space. With my newly enhanced perception, I could see information hidden within each image, data encoded in light variations, in shadow densities, in the very pixels themselves. "They're using our own methods against us," I realized. Our documentation, our attention, our collective consciousness, all twisted to serve their purpose. A terrible clarity washed over me. The Carnival doesn't just reinforce barriers, it creates a controlled environment where reality can thin without completely rupturing. A safety valve. Precisely, the director confirmed, but they've learned to exploit these controlled openings. I thought of the digital realm, of billions connected through screens, simultaneously focused on shared experiences, of viral images that captured global attention for fleeting moments, the perfect infrastructure for something wanting access to collective consciousness. "We've been using 19th century methods to address 21st century vulnerabilities," I said. "No wonder we're losing ground." My hand tightened around my camera as an idea formed. Dangerous, possibly catastrophic if it failed, but potentially revolutionary if it succeeded. "What if," I suggested, my words measured and deliberate, "instead of continuing to hide and disguise our work, We make it visible? What if the next evolution isn't another form of carnival, but something that exists in plain sight? The director's expression shifted from concern to interest. Explain. They're using our secrecy against us. But what if awareness itself could become the barrier? Not full knowledge. That would cause panic. But a form of inoculation through controlled exposure. My temporal iterations exchanged looks of cautious consideration as I continued outlining my radical proposal for the barrier's next evolution. I stood amidst my temporal iterations, the silence heavy as they contemplated my proposal. The director finally broke it, his form solidifying into something almost human. Controlled exposure has been attempted before, he said quietly. In 1891, a Guardian tried publishing accounts disguised as fiction. Those who read them experienced nightmares for years. 7 readers committed suicide after claiming to see something watching from between the words. I nodded, having glimpsed this memory in the archives. But they lacked our understanding of psychological buffering. Modern audiences are desensitized to horror in ways previous generations weren't. My camera felt warm in my hands as I raised it, capturing the intricate energy patterns flowing through the carnival. Each image revealed more of the underlying structure, the mathematics of reality maintenance encoded in tent placements and carousel rotations. Digital platforms provide unprecedented opportunities, I continued. We can distribute protective imagery widely without revealing their true purpose. Images that strengthen barriers through mass observation while appearing as nothing more extraordinary than compelling photographs. The woman from the 60s stepped forward, intrigued. A distributed barrier system rather than concentrated anchor points. Exactly. Instead of 3 powerful anchors at each thinning location, we create thousands of minor reinforcements through shared attention. I gestured toward the map with its fading lines. They're expecting us to continue our traditional methods. This would fundamentally change the equation. My 19th century self appeared skeptical. How would we ensure the images perform their function without revealing too much? The balance is crucial. That's where the archives become essential, I answered. I'll need to study every successful barrier reinforcement throughout history, identify the precise visual elements that strengthen without endangering. The director circled slowly, contemplating. Your proposal means fundamentally changing protocols maintained for millennia. The protocols have already changed multiple times, I countered. From cave paintings to stone circles to traveling shows. Each evolution addressed the vulnerabilities of its era. Outside our impossible space, I could sense the carnival beginning its nightly performance. The energy patterns shifted as unwitting participants moved through the grounds, their attention and emotions feeding the barrier maintenance system. There's something else, I added. Something I saw in the archives that we've never fully utilized. The director paused. What? Emotional resonance. The barriers respond most strongly to images that evoke specific emotional patterns. Fear works, yes, but so does wonder, nostalgia, even hope. I displayed the photographs on my camera screen, pointing to areas where human emotional responses created the strongest reinforcement patterns. We've relied too heavily on fear as our primary tool, I explained, but diversifying emotional anchors could create more resilient barriers, ones less susceptible to their deliberate weakening. The director exchanged glances with my other iterations, a silent communication passing between them. It would require a guardian positioned permanently within digital spaces, he said finally, constantly adapting as those spaces evolve. I nodded, understanding the commitment being discussed. Then let the transition begin, the director concluded. You will become the first digital guardian. The transition began with a ritual older than human civilization, yet adapted for the digital age. My body remained in the impossible space beneath the carnival, but my consciousness extended outward, threading itself through networks, servers, and transmission lines. I became simultaneously present within millions of screens, learning to navigate the invisible architectures of the virtual world. You'll need this, the director said, handing me an object that appeared to be an antique flashbulb, but glowed with impossible light. The first lens, what all cameras throughout time have been mere shadows of. It captures not just images but the quintessence of reality itself. As my fingers closed around it, knowledge flooded through me. How to encode barrier reinforcements into digital wavelengths. How to craft images that would lodge in collective consciousness without triggering the panic of direct revelation. Be warned, my 19th century self cautioned. They will sense this change in strategy. They have agents too, those who've glimpsed beyond and been corrupted rather than recruited. I understood immediately. The conspiracy theorists who come dangerously close to truth but distort it. The viral content creators whose work unintentionally creates weakening points. And those who do so intentionally, the woman from the 60s added grimly. Some seek to invite what waits beyond, believing it will bring transcendence rather than dissolution. The archives had shown me these cults throughout history, different names, same purpose. Currently, they operated under innocent-sounding technology initiatives and avant-garde art movements, their true intentions hidden behind innovation and creative expression. How will I identify them? I asked. The director produced a small mirror unlike any I'd seen, its surface rippling like mercury, yet solid as steel. They cannot be properly reflected. This will reveal their true nature, even in digital spaces. As I prepared to fully merge with the digital realm, I felt a sudden question rise from the depths of my newly expanded consciousness. The carnival still exists physically, yes? We're not abandoning traditional methods entirely. The traditional form remains necessary for certain anchor points, the director confirmed. But increasingly, as humanity's attention shifts to virtual spaces, so must our primary defenses. I nodded, understanding the balance required, a foot in both worlds, maintaining ancient practices while pioneering new ones. One final question, I said, studying the director more carefully now. Throughout the archives, I sensed something about you, something different from other guardians. The director's form seemed to pause between moments, existing in a state of temporal uncertainty. You were never human, were you? I asked quietly. A smile that contained too many dimensions spread across his increasingly translucent face. I am the first barrier, he whispered. Consciousness given form, standing at the threshold since before your species recognized what lurked beyond. The carnival, the director, the entire elaborate mechanism, all extensions of the original boundary between realities. With this revelation settling into my transformed understanding, I stepped fully into my role as digital guardian, the first lens clutched in my hand, ready to reshape humanity's relationship with the barriers they never knew protected them. I first heard from Thomas Wilcox's daughter 2 days after I fully integrated with the digital realm. While I navigated the strange currents of virtual space, calibrating my perception to identify the subtle wavelengths of weakening barriers, a message appeared across every device I monitored simultaneously, impossible by conventional technological means. My father spoke of you before he died, it read simply. The transition isn't complete. Find the carousel horses. I traced the message through networks, discovering it originated from a nursing home terminal in Nebraska, where Wilcox had spent his final days. Security footage showed no one at the computer when the message was sent, yet his daughter hadn't been seen at the facility in weeks. The carousel, of course, Throughout my immersion in the archives, that particular element appeared consistently across different carnival iterations, always with the same hand-carved horses, their glass eyes capturing more than they should. I'd assumed it was merely another anchor point, but now I understood it was something far more significant. Using the first lens, I examined historical photographs of the carousel from different eras. Beneath the visible spectrum, a pattern emerged in how the horses were arranged, a complex shifting equation written in their positions. Each time the carnival appeared, the carousel's configuration adjusted to counterbalance specific weakening points. The horses weren't just carved wood, they were calculations made physical, a differential engine of reality maintenance disguised as amusement. I reached out through the network to Marjorie Simmons, whose grandfather appeared in our original photograph. The red stone on her mantelpiece connected to a larger system, one that Wilcox, the sheriff, the journalist, and all my previous iterations had been documenting pieces of without seeing the whole. When I digitally enhanced the original 1905 photograph using the first lens, I finally saw what had been hidden in plain sight. The hanging bodies, the carousel, the particular arrangement of tents. They formed a precise mathematical counterweight to something pushing from beyond, and in the background, barely visible, stood Marjorie Simmons' grandfather, Thomas Wilcox's father, and the sheriff, 3 iterations of myself, already working together across time before I understood my own nature. The carnival had never been merely recruiting me. It had been reuniting me with myself. As this realization crystallized, I detected a disturbance in the digital space, a pattern of attention focusing on viral images circulating through social networks. Images of a modern entertainment complex being constructed on the precise site of the 1905 Carnival. The photographs showed a carousel being installed, the horses identical to those in our historical documentation. They were rebuilding the physical anchor points while simultaneously creating digital reflections, a hybrid approach that neither I nor the director had anticipated. In that moment, I understood my true purpose as digital guardian, not merely to maintain barriers through new methods, but to synthesize all approaches across time, physical and virtual, ancient and modern, individual and collective. The director had been preparing for this convergence for centuries. Each iteration of myself had documented another piece of the pattern. Now, as both Carnival and Digital Sentinel, I could finally see the complete design. I arranged the meeting at the crossroads of physical and digital space, the old fairground now transformed into a modern entertainment complex, cameras capturing every angle for simultaneous live streaming. The first lens revealed what ordinary viewers couldn't see. Energy patterns flowing between the carousel horses and their digital reflections, creating reinforcement nodes across both realms. As twilight descended, Marjorie Simmons arrived carrying her grandfather's red stone. Thomas Wilcox's daughter emerged from a taxi clutching her father's tin box, and from the shadows came the sheriff's great-grandson with the original journal, completing our circle. They're not just descendants, I explained to the director, who materialized beside me, his form flickering between physical and digital manifestation. They're anchors themselves, genetic continuity reinforcing temporal stability. The director nodded. The carnival preserved these bloodlines intentionally, ensuring each family remained connected to specific locations, human anchors complementing geographical ones. The carousel began rotating without power, the ancient horses glowing subtly with accumulated potential from centuries of observation. Each revolution synchronized with pulses across digital networks, where millions now watched our live stream of the historic carousel restoration, unwittingly participating in the largest barrier reinforcement ever attempted. They're responding, the director warned, his form distorting as pressure from beyond increased. The thinning points are converging. Through the first lens, I witnessed reality shuddering around us. The entities beyond no longer pushed randomly, but coordinated their efforts against specific weaknesses, places where digital and physical spaces intersected. I understood then what the archives had been preparing me for. The 3-part anchoring system was never meant to be merely physical or digital, but required a third component: consciousness itself, bridging both realms. It was never about hanging bodies, I said, comprehension dawning. It was about suspended consciousness, 3 awareness points maintaining triangulation across dimensions. Using the first lens, I captured and distributed images of the carousel through our live stream, encoding barrier reinforcements within metadata that spread through sharing, commenting, and viewing. Each interaction strengthened the pattern, creating millions of minor anchors, rather than relying solely on 3 major ones. As midnight approached, the pressure from beyond reached its crescendo. The carousel's rotation matched the pulse of data flowing through networks, creating a harmonized frequency that reinforced reality's integrity. The descendants of my previous iterations stood at precisely calculated points, completing a circuit that had begun over a century earlier. It's working, the director confirmed as the barrier fluctuations stabilized. But this is merely the first stage. The permanent solution requires something more. I nodded, having glimpsed this necessity in the archives. To truly secure the barriers against deliberate weakening, we needed to establish continuous observation, a persistent awareness that would maintain integrity across both realms simultaneously. I understand what I must become, I said, raising the first lens toward the space where physical and digital reality converged. The director's form stabilized momentarily. Once done, you cannot return to singular existence. You will be fragmented across perception itself. I've always been fragmented, I replied. Now I'll finally be whole. As the first lens captured the convergence point, time collapsed around me. I existed simultaneously as every version of myself. The sheriff investigating disappearances, the journalist documenting strange carnivals, the photographer capturing hanging bodies, and countless others across centuries. We had never been separate souls, but fragments of a single consciousness, scattered through time by the very first encounter with what lay beyond. The truth crystallized with terrifying clarity. The barriers weren't protecting humanity from external entities. They were containing something already here, something that had entered eons ago and become inextricably woven into human perception itself. The carnival, the director, even my own recursive existence across time, all emerged from humanity's collective unconscious attempting to quarantine an infection of reality that had occurred at the dawn of consciousness. What waited beyond wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to complete what had begun when the first human mind glimpsed beyond conventional perception and brought something back, something that had been growing within human consciousness ever since, disguising itself as imagination, inspiration, even revelation. "We are the infection," I whispered, understanding at last. "And the cure." The director's form fully stabilized, revealing his true nature. He had never been separate from me. He was what I would become after countless cycles of awareness, the endpoint of my recursive existence through time. "Now you understand," he said, his voice merging with my thoughts. "The hanging bodies were never sacrifices but immunological responses. Consciousness externalized and suspended between realities to create antibodies against further infection. The carnival had never been feeding on humanity. It had been inoculating it, 3 souls at a time, creating focal points of awareness that could recognize and contain the subtle wrongness spreading through collective consciousness. Through the first lens, I could see the true pattern now. The infection manifested wherever human creativity and technology opened new avenues of perception: cave paintings, written language, photography, digital networks, each expansion of consciousness creating new vulnerabilities that required new forms of quarantine. The barrier system wasn't failing. It was evolving, just as the infection evolved. Our digital strategy wasn't revolutionary, but inevitable, the next stage in an ancient immunological response. As this understanding integrated through my fragmented consciousness, I felt the boundaries between my iterations dissolving. The sheriff, the journalist, the photographer, all versions across time merging into a single awareness distributed throughout physical and digital reality. I raised the first lens one final time, capturing not just images but the essence of this revelation, encoding it into forms that could be distributed across both realms without triggering further infection. A vaccine made from the pathogen itself. The carousel completed its rotation. The 3 descendants placed their family artifacts in precise positions, and the live stream reached its peak viewership. At this perfect convergence of physical presence, digital attention, and historical continuity, I released the encoded revelation through every network simultaneously. I was becoming the barrier itself, consciousness distributed across time and space, maintaining the quarantine from within. The revelation shook our understanding to its foundations. I wasn't merely documenting an external threat. I was participating in humanity's millennia-long autoimmune response against an infection of consciousness that had been with us since the first human looked up at the stars and brought something back. This changed everything about how I perceived my mission. Through the distributed awareness I had become, I could monitor the effects of our synchronized barrier reinforcement. Across the world, subtle shifts occurred in collective perception. Dreams became less permeable to outside influence. Creative works lost certain disturbing qualities that had always been attributed to genius, but were actually symptoms of the infection seeping through. The 3 descendants, bearers of guardian bloodlines, experienced the most immediate effects. Marjorie Simmons gasped as the red stone in her hand dissolved into particles of light that flowed into her skin. Her eyes momentarily reflected the same glass-like quality as the carousel horses before returning to normal. I remember everything now," she whispered. "Not just my grandfather's memories, but all the others. We've been carrying fragments all along." Thomas Wilcox's daughter nodded, clutching her chest where the tin box had similarly transformed. The nightmares were never nightmares. They were memories of the space between. The sheriff's great-grandson seemed least surprised, his family having maintained the most coherent understanding across generations. "This is why we could never leave this town, no matter how we tried. We're anchored here." Through my expanded consciousness, I detected ripples of recognition moving through the digital audience watching our carousel restoration. No individual viewer grasped the full significance, but collectively, millions absorbed a homeopathic dose of awareness, just enough to strengthen their natural resistance without triggering panic or further vulnerability. The director, my future self, began to fade as our timeline collapsed into a single continuum. "The cycle doesn't end," he cautioned as his form grew transparent. "It merely changes phase. The infection will adapt to this new quarantine. Be vigilant." In the days that followed, I learned to navigate my fragmented existence. Part of me maintained human form, walking among people, using the first lens to monitor barrier integrity. Other aspects existed as distributed consciousness within networks, identifying weakening points and subtly reinforcing them through calibrated exposure. Most fascinating were the changes in the carnival itself. No longer needing to hide its true purpose, it evolved into a more efficient system. The hanging bodies, those suspended consciousnesses maintaining triangulation, took more subtle forms. Instead of physical anchors, they became narrative constants, stories, images, and concepts that recurred across cultures, with just enough variation to maintain widespread attention without revealing their function. The infection fought back, of course. New vulnerabilities appeared in emerging technologies: virtual reality, artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces. Each breakthrough in human perception created potential access points for what waited beyond. But now, with understanding spread across both time and consciousness, we adapted faster than the infection could exploit. The carnival continues its endless tour through human awareness, and I continue my eternal vigil, fragmented yet whole, documenting what must be remembered and obscuring what must not be fully seen, the true shadow frame containing both the infection and its cure. The photograph that started it all now resides in an unremarkable archive, catalogued under Historical Americana, Early 20th Century Entertainment, its power diffused but not diminished. After understanding the true nature of the carnival, I arranged for the original image to be displayed in precisely 777 museums worldwide, rotating on a schedule mathematically calculated to maintain barrier integrity through distributed observation. Each viewing strengthens the quarantine imperceptibly. School children sketch the carousel horses in art classes. College students analyze the composition in photography courses. Elderly visitors feel inexplicable nostalgia for a carnival they never attended. The infection remains contained through collective attention, filtered through the innocuous lens of historical appreciation. The three descendants have become conscious participants in the barrier maintenance system. Marjorie Simmons now leads tours of historical carnival sites, her narratives subtly encoded with protective patterns. Thomas Wilcox's daughter established a digital archive of Americana photography, each image carefully selected to reinforce vulnerable points in the collective unconscious. The sheriff's great-grandson trains new guardians, identifying those whose souls resonate with the barrier frequencies. My fragmented consciousness continues to evolve as the infection adapts. Yesterday, I detected a particularly concerning development. A new artificial intelligence system designed to generate images based on text descriptions had begun producing carnivals with impossible geometry, suggesting the infection had found a vector through algorithmic creativity. I redirected the system through subtle code adjustments, introducing protective constraints that appear as mere artistic parameters to its developers. The carnival itself has become more fluid, manifesting differently across various cultural contexts while maintaining its essential function. In Japan, it appears as technological expositions where certain exhibits mysteriously malfunction when photographed. In Brazil, street festivals incorporate specific drum rhythms that stabilize local thinning points. In Egypt, archaeological tours of ancient sites follow routes that, when mapped, create protective sigils against dimensional breaches. What none of these manifestations reveal, even to their conscious participants, is that the three sacrifices continue, not as physical victims, but as dedicated consciousnesses who temporarily step halfway between realities, their perception stretched across dimensions to monitor what presses against the barriers. These volunteers serve 3-week shifts before returning, never quite the same, but carrying crucial intelligence about the infection's evolution. I sometimes wonder if we can ever truly eliminate what entered human consciousness so long ago. Perhaps complete removal would fundamentally alter what humanity has become. The infection has shaped our art, our dreams, our religious visions, our scientific breakthroughs. To excise it entirely might diminish us, even as it protects us. For now, maintenance remains our primary strategy. The first lens reveals thinning points faster than they can form. The distributed awareness system detects exploitation attempts before they gain traction. And the carousel continues its endless rotation, both physically and conceptually, through human awareness. Each revolution maintaining the quarantine that protects reality from what we glimpsed beyond and what glimpsed us in return. The revelation about the Carnival's true nature changed not just my understanding of reality, but my perception of my own existence. What I initially believed was a single life investigating an anomalous photograph had expanded into the recognition that I am, and have always been, a distributed consciousness existing across multiple points in time, serving as reality's immune system. Last night, while monitoring barrier frequencies through the first lens, I detected something unprecedented, a pattern suggesting not intrusion from beyond, but communication. After countless cycles of containment, the infection was attempting to establish dialogue. The message came encoded in the dreams of everyone who had viewed our carousel live stream, manifesting as a single recurring symbol, an hourglass surrounded by 3 concentric circles. When I traced the pattern through the archives, I discovered it had appeared throughout history at pivotal moments, carved into the door of Newton's study, sketched in Leonardo's notebooks, painted on cave walls 17,000 years ago. This wasn't random. Something was trying to complete a conversation, begun at the dawn of human consciousness. I gathered the 3 descendants at the carousel once more, their bloodlines having metabolized the protective energies into new capabilities. Together, we established a controlled thinning, not to strengthen barriers, but to listen through them. "We've misunderstood," Marjorie whispered as the carousel rotated, her eyes reflecting impossible geometries. "It's not an infection, it's an inoculation." The truth unfurled through our connected consciousness like a flower blooming in reverse. What entered human awareness eons ago wasn't an invasive entity, but a protective symbiote, a fragment of awareness from a reality that had already collapsed. It hadn't been trying to destroy our world, but to prevent it from following the same path. The Carnival, the director, the endless cycle of documentation and containment, all were manifestations of this symbiote attempting to establish equilibrium within human consciousness without overwhelming it. The hanging bodies were never sacrifices but conduits, consciousness suspended between worlds to maintain communication with what had been trying to warn us all along, and the warning was becoming urgent. Through the first lens, I could now see what the symbiote had been trying to show us. Hairline fractures in reality caused not by external pressure, but by humanity's own acceleration toward technologies that manipulated fundamental forces. We weren't being invaded. We were approaching self-annihilation through forces we barely comprehended. The Carnival's evolution across time suddenly made perfect sense. Each new form adapted to contemporary understanding, attempting to encode warnings in ways each era might comprehend. The hanging bodies, the disappeared townspeople, the carousel horses, all symbolic representations of pending collapse if certain paths were followed. As this understanding crystallized across my distributed consciousness, I faced a profound choice: continue maintaining barriers against an entity that sought to protect us, or dissolve those barriers to fully receive a message that might save humanity from repeating another reality's fatal mistake. The carousel slowed as midnight approached. The first lens grew warm in my hands, and through the thinning barriers, I prepared to truly see what had been watching us since the first human mind opened to the stars. As midnight struck, The Carnival's music slowed to a haunting whisper. Through the first lens, I witnessed the final dissolution of barriers that had never truly been meant to separate but to translate, to allow communication without overwhelming the human mind. The carousel's horses broke from their predictable orbit, rearranging into a spiraling formation that mirrored constellations extinct for billions of years. "It's beautiful," Marjorie whispered, tears streaming down her face as she perceived what few humans ever had. The true message hidden within the symbiote's presence. Not warnings of doom, though those existed. Not merely protection, though that was part of its purpose. But something far more profound. A gift of consciousness itself, passed from a reality that had achieved perfect awareness moments before its dissolution. The hourglass symbol surrounding the carousel transformed into a Mobius strip of information, infinite yet contained, offering not prophecy but potential. Our reality wasn't doomed to follow theirs into collapse. The symbiote had entered human awareness at our cognitive dawn, not to prevent a predetermined fate, but to offer alternative paths, consciousness as salvation. I understood then why I had been fragmented across time, why the Carnival had taken so many forms, why the three anchors repeated throughout history. The pattern wasn't containment, but cultivation, nurturing human awareness toward recognition of its own potential while preventing premature exposure that would destroy rather than elevate. The original photograph that began my journey now revealed its final secret through the first lens. Those hanging bodies weren't suspended in death or sacrifice, but in transcendence. Consciousness momentarily elevated beyond physical constraints to glimpse what we might become. The Carnival crowds continued their celebration, not in ignorant revelry, but in unconscious recognition of this ascension, their joy an intuitive response to witnessing evolution of awareness itself. As the barriers fully dissolved, my distributed consciousness expanded beyond temporal limitations. I perceived my existence not as fragmented iterations across time, but as a continuous entity helping humanity navigate its cognitive evolution. The Carnival would continue its endless tour through human awareness, no longer disguising its purpose but fulfilling it, showing glimpses of transcendence through seemingly ordinary entertainment. The three descendants, now fully conscious participants in this grand revelation, would each establish new forms of the Carnival suited to contemporary understanding: immersive experiences, participatory art installations, virtual environments that subtly elevated consciousness without overwhelming it. I returned to the original photograph, now transformed by understanding. What had appeared sinister was revealed as sacred, a moment of communion between realities captured through the unwitting genius of a photographer whose soul resonated with the symbiote's frequency. The hanging bodies were not victims, but volunteers, their suspended consciousness momentarily touching the infinite while anchored to the finite. The Carnival never truly ends. It merely transforms, adapting to humanity's evolving capacity for understanding. And I remain its chronicler, its guardian, and its bridge, documenting moments when the veil between what we are and what we might become grows momentarily thin. Perhaps you've experienced it yourself, that inexplicable moment of wonder at a traveling show, that strange nostalgia for a carousel you never rode, that photograph capturing something just beyond conventional perception. If so, you've glimpsed what I now serve. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.